Sean, how far can I go out? For the shot? Yeah, how far can I go out? Right here? It's pretty easy. Huh? Right here? Okay. Can you? Yes, ma'am. How are you? And then you're the insert. This side. Yes, ma'am. Can I do this? Is this you? Oh, no. I can give them to Alex.
Can you tell my phone's in my pocket?
Yeah. Sean, how far can you see me on this side?
Somewhere I'll be here with
Right here?
Everybody, real quick, if you're going to answer a question, please introduce yourself first. Thank you.
Turn next.
Yes. Oh, yes. Deputy Mayor Turner.
Nice weather.
I heard all the noise outside your office. You got some friends.
Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Muriel Bowser. I am the mayor of Washington, D.C. I am joined by our Congresswoman Eleanor Holmes Norton, Council Chairman Phil Mendelson, and members of the Council of the District of Columbia. We are here on a beautiful day in our beautiful city, and our priority is to keep Washington, D.C. a beautiful world-class city. But unfortunately, we are here today to talk about potentially devastating and really highly unusual situation that we faced with the draft budget CR that would immediately have the effect of cutting $1 billion out of our local budget. So let me tell you what's happening. In the most recent continuing resolution language, it ignores our already congressionally approved fiscal 2025 budget. Instead, it would peg us at FY24 levels, the levels that federal agencies are, because they do not have an approved FY25 budget. But we are not a federal agency. We are a city, county, state all at once, and we provide direct services to the people of the District of Columbia, visitors to the District of Columbia, businesses in the District of Columbia, diplomats and visiting heads of state, and everyone who works here in the Congress. Our budget was balanced and approved. And if we go back to fiscal 2024 levels, we would be forced to reduce spending by $1.1 billion in only 6 months. But here is why we're here today, because Congress can fix this. They can fix this $1.1 billion problem that we have brought to their attention in the draft CR. The Congress can add the language back to the continuing resolution, the same language that's been there for the past 2 continuing resolutions that authorize us to spend our locally generated revenue according to our own approved budget and timeline. And I want to emphasize the local part of that statement. The District of Columbia raises and spends its own money, just like every other state. So remember that the budget we're talking about, this budget, the approved FY25 budget, was introduced by me and approved by this council. It focuses on 3 main areas: public safety, public education, and economic growth. Disrupting those investments won't be good for DC or our country. And this is not just about us. Certainly, we are concerned about the 700,000 tax-paying Americans that call DC home. But it's also about our nation's capital. And so I want Americans across the country to know that we are proud of our city. We are a growing city. In fact, if we were a state last year, we would have been the fastest improving state in the nation. We balance our budgets. We have 28 balanced budgets. We have increased visitation. Americans from around the country and people from around the world broke a record last year, and we have driven down violent crime to the lowest levels in the years. And actually, this is a good time to visit the district because soon we'll have beautiful cherry blossoms as well. This action, let me be clear, if the Congress goes through with this action, it will work against a priority that President Trump and I share, and that is to make Washington, D.C. the best, most beautiful city in the world. And we want to work with our partners in the federal government to ensure that D.C. always represents the strength and prosperity of this country. I'm pleased now to introduce our Congresswoman Eleanor Holmes Norton, who always works with her colleagues to make sure that any anomalies are addressed. Congresswoman Norton.
Thank you, Mayor Bowser. House Republicans released the text of a continuing resolution this weekend that commits nothing less than fiscal sabotage of D.C. It is the latest blow in an escalating war on D.C. residents and the limited home rule D.C. currently possesses. The CR omitted a long-standing provision that would allow D.C. to continue spending its local fiscal year 2025 budget and instead treats D.C. as a federal agency, forcing the district to revert to spending at fiscal year 2024 levels for the remainder of the year. If enacted, the CR would result in a projected cuts of $1 billion, which would force dramatic reductions in essential services the city provides, including D.C. police, EMS, and schools. It is contrary to the state Republican goal of improving public safety, law, and order in the nation's capital, and would in fact have the opposite effect. D.C. has not been treated as a federal agency for funding purposes in more than 20 years, precisely because Republicans of a different generation recognize the disastrous effects of this causes. Congress should keep its hands off D.C. D.C. is not a federal agency. The omissions constitute a dramatic escalation in the Republican effort to undermine what small measure of democracy and autonomy the more than 700,000 residents of the nation's capital currently have. Republicans have introduced bills in both chambers of Congress to repeal the Home Rule Act, which aims to abolish the D.C. Council and Mayor's office, leaving D.C. to depend on members of Congress elected by other jurisdictions to run the district. The Revolutionary War was fought to give consent to the governed and to end taxation without representation. The Republican efforts toward a federal government takeover of D.C. run counter to this history. D.C. population is larger than that of 2 states. D.C. pays more federal taxes per capita than any state, and more than 21 states overall. D.C. residents have fought and died in all this nation's wars. We deserve statehood, the only measure that would bring D.C. equality, and the states and full protection DC residents and fully protect DC residents from this type of disastrous congressional interference. Thank you.
Thank you, Congresswoman Norton, and I'd like to introduce now the Chairman of the Council of the District of Columbia, Phil Mendelson.
Thank you, Mayor Bowser. Good afternoon. Before I go any further, I do want to introduce my colleagues who are here, and we are all here because we're making a point that the District of Columbia government is unified in concern and opposition to the language that is or is not in this continuing resolution adversely affecting the district. I'm joined by my colleagues, Councilmember Brianne Nadeau, Matt Fruman, Janice Lewis-George, Zachary Parker, Charles Allen, Wendell Felder, Anita Bonds, Kenyon McDuffie, Christina Henderson, and Robert White. There's one member missing because she is out of town. We are deeply concerned about the language that was released in the continuing resolution because of its adverse effect on the district. The mayor made the point that we would have to cut about $1 billion. Well, we would have a half a year to cut that 1 year savings, the difference between fiscal year 2024 and 2025. What does that mean? Why am I saying that? Because actually the effect is we would have to cut $2 billion in the remaining 6 months to achieve the $1 billion annualized savings. But it's not really savings because these are DC dollars. These are not federal dollars. Most folks, unfortunately, in this country think the District of Columbia is funded by the federal government. We are not. It is true that we are included in an Appropriations Act, not that we want to be, but the fact that we're included in an Appropriations Act, what Congress does year after year, is to approve the dollars that we've appropriated. Our dollars. And so by treating us like any federal agency when we are not, is to fail to recognize that the district operates as a state, and the so-called savings are not savings such as they would get by cutting a federal department or holding a federal department to fiscal year 2024. But as the mayor and the congressman noted, there have already been 2 continuing resolutions that have authorized our spending at current year levels. And so to switch, so to speak, switch the rules of the game in the middle of the game is even more damaging. And what is the impact? The impact is on public safety, on policing, on fire response, on public education, our schools, our charter schools, on the cleanliness of our city, on housing, on dealing with the homelessness, on all these issues. That would be what would be adversely affected. I can't emphasize enough, Congress has set us up to act like a state. We do act like a state. We're organized like a state. We tax like a state does. And we spend like a state does, except we have balanced budgets year after year. And so these are not savings for the federal government. This is simply damage to the district. It cripples this district for the remainder of this year, which is why, again, we stand here in unified opposition to this language and ask that the amendment that Congresswoman Eleanor Holmes Norton has asked be included, that be accepted so that we can avoid this damage. Thank you.
Okay, I think Phil and I are available to take a few questions. And one second. And I also want to acknowledge that we've been joined by the city administrator for the district, Kevin Donahue, the budget director for the district, Jenny Reed, and my deputy mayors that serve in my cabinet. Yes.
Can you tell us, have you reached out to the White House?
Yes.
What can you tell us about that conversation?
That they are aware of what's happening at the Congress, and we've asked for their help.
Are they sympathetic with you, or have they indicated they would help on your behalf?
I think they've indicated that it didn't come from them.
And then can I ask, if this were to go through and you were to take $1 billion out over the next 6 months,
What would happen to that? It seems like you would have that $1 billion at the end of that fiscal year. What would happen to that $1 billion?
Well, Mark, I think that's not where we are. You heard Chairman Mendelson indicate that our Congresswoman is moving an amendment to correct what we want. I like to think of as a $1.1 billion mistake. And the thing about mistakes is they can be corrected, and there's time to do that. And what Phil also mentioned is that we're halfway through our fiscal year. So we have actually less than 6 months left to cut $1.1 billion. And the way our budgets are made up, and I'm going to ask Kevin and Jenny to be on deck, is that there's really, you have to go to the big spending agencies to get to that kind of money that fast. So there's no way to cut that kind of money in the time that we would have in this fiscal year, not to affect police or not to affect teachers and not to affect some of the basic government services that allow us to keep our city clean, safe, and beautiful.
Same question about the Speaker and the Chair of the Appropriations Committee. Have you spoken to them about this? And
we're reaching out to all of their offices. I don't know, Phil, if you want to mention anything else.
I've had communication with the appropriations.
Yes.
No, Bowser, you had Campbell Roberts was it?
And when I say reach out, let me just be more clear. We're having conversations with the staff that we always work on issues affecting the district.
You had proposed
Can you introduce yourself?
Campbell Roberts from the New York Times.
Okay.
You had proposed a budget that was about $500 million cuts last year.
Yes.
And some of that was restored by the City Council.
Yes.
Well,
you know how budgets work.
Oh, I do. Could you explain why this would be more painful than, some version of what you're proposing? Like, is it the timing, is it the speed, or is it the scale?
Well, let me just step back a little bit, just kind of on the premise. The district, as I already mentioned, is not a federal agency. And so we have an approved budget. It's the feds that haven't approved the FY25 budget. We have. And we have been operating under that budget for over 6 months. So we have expended half of what has been approved. And if we are asked now to cut the remainder in 6 months, it has an even more significant impact. And that's why we say before, when I introduced cuts, to answer you more specifically, it did not affect police spending. This probably would. It did not affect the public schools or the public charter schools. This could, because we have to, if you think of the district's budget and how it's made up, our top agencies are in Health and Human Services, Medicaid spending, which in a short period of time, we probably wouldn't be able to do anything there. But the other big agencies are public education and public safety.
Mayor, what?
We're already discussing the impacts of the federal layoffs on our economy.
Correct.
If this money gets cut and now there are potentially more layoffs or furloughs to fire or police, anywhere really, how does this impact our economy even further?
Well, let me say this, and I want everybody to be clear about this. We came into this year, 2025, with a very strong economy, a balanced budget, growing population, growing business activity, more visitation, a huge investment in sports, and more on the way. That's how we started this year. And the things that have changed is that our economy, our workforce is being gutted, and it is going to have the impact over the long haul, certainly over the next 4 years, of decreasing our anticipated revenues by over $1 billion. Okay, as bad as that is, we can plan for that. Or we can slow it down, and we hope that the administration does slow it down, because we know that this region can support a productive American workforce. This, on top of it, also sends the signal that the federal government would be working against our joint goals. And those joint goals are making the city safe, beautiful, growing, thriving, and a symbol to the world. Our nation's capital reflects great American values.
Mayor Bowser.
A member of Congress who says that this spending reduction would be necessary given the $1 billion deficit forecasted over the next 3 years.
We have an upcoming budget process that will address any spending pressures. We're in that process right now. In about 3 weeks, I'm scheduled to send a balanced budget to the Council of the District of Columbia. And it will be balanced, and it will represent the forecast that our CFO has. But it will also reflect investments that will help the city grow. Investments that will help us change that trajectory, that help us attract more businesses, more employees, more residents, more sports and entertainment. That's what we have to do with our upcoming budget. What we shouldn't have to do is stop it, delay it, to deal with the next 6 months, because we did that last year. This budget is balanced and approved.
Mayor Bowser, just how dramatic would the cuts be to police if these cuts are enacted through Congress? Would you have to lay off or furlough officers?
We went through a whole pandemic without laying off anybody. We did. And it would never be my first choice to lay off anybody. But I already explained to you kind of the big buckets of spending that we have in a city like ours. Health and Human Service, public schools, public safety. And I want to be clear about something, because we've been around here, most of us, long enough to know that the renaissance of Washington, D.C., the comeback of our city, is directly tied to public safety and public education. And we're very proud of the progress that we've made.
Mayor Bowser, have you spoken to Chairman Comer at all? Has he been helpful in any way?
We have spoken to the chairman's staff that we work with on a day-to-day basis.
You mentioned that you're in the middle of the FY26 budget.
Not in the middle, we're at the end.
Towards the end,
Yeah.
Harry can unveil it in less than a month. So how does this CR affect the actual process that your team is going through and making the final decision about that?
Well, honestly, I hope we don't get to that point, because it may mean that we have to pause it and focus on this.
And in your conversations with Speaker Johnson about this, do you get the sense that they did this fully knowing the effect it would have on DC? Or do you get the sense they didn't fully understand that DC has this local budget that is funded by DC taxpayers?
Well, you would have to ask them that, but I can't imagine why anybody would want to have less public safety resources on the streets. I can't imagine why anybody would do that. I can't imagine why anybody would want us to take money away from our schools that are performing, on par with public schools across the nation. Especially with the focus on safety and beautification in the district, all of those resources would be drained.
Mayor, what kind of... Talk a little bit about how the day-to-day effects of what passing the CR would look like for DC residents?
Okay, I've said a little bit, but I'm going to ask Kevin Donahue or Jenny Reed to come up to talk about just kind of the budget impact and formulation process.
Thank you, Mayor. So a little context. So about a week ago, our CFO forecasted lower revenue over the course of the next 4 years. He forecasted about $1 billion that we would lose as a result of federal job cuts. The CR would have us cut that amount that we're planning for over 4 years over the course of 6 months. And we'd effectively start with a week's notice. So when you have a budget that is 85% personnel, and almost all the personnel are focused on residents and delivering service, almost by definition, to make the math work on that kind of cut with almost no warning, you have to immediately go to where your spending is, which is on people that deliver service. So I would expect if this were to go through, we'd have an immediate hiring freeze. We'd follow up by identifying where we would begin layoffs, and we would have to relatively shortly begin layoffs to core services. We would try to protect and minimize the impact, but inevitably, if you're making effectively 4 years worth of reductions in a single year over 6 months with 5 days warning, there's not the time for the kind of planning we do each and every budget. A question was asked earlier about our last budget. We did, in fact, in our last budget, have to make about $500 million in cuts in 1 year. We had 6 months to plan for it. We were able to take it from efficiencies. We were able to identify services that were low performing or underutilized and sunset those. They were thoughtfully done in ways that minimize the impact on DC residents and visitors. When you're making that volume of cut, you're doubling it, and you're giving yourselves not 6 months to plan for it, but about 5 or 6 days. You don't have that kind of planning or thoughtfulness. You try to immediately begin to pull spending down to be able to hit the year-end number. And that starts with people, because 85% of taxpayer dollars goes to people who directly serve DC residents.
Okay, just a couple more. Any others?
Well, and if this cut goes through, would that put any pause in, possible plans of putting a new NFL stadium in future budgets?
Thank you for asking that question. It would put a pause in investments in how we grow. And that's what, to deal with the forecast for the next 4 years, we have to be attracting new companies. We have to attract more residents, more workers, more entertainment options, including how we activate 177 acres that are now unused.
If the CR were to pass, would that at all play into the bond rating analysis? Do you know about that?
I don't know if I could say that.
You've explained this, but could you just sum up how you've made some progress with President Trump, with Republicans, including James Comer, on the Oversight Committee? Could you explain how this kind of goes at odds at the progress that you've made with Congress and with the White House?
Well, our Congresswoman works with her colleagues every day on issues that impact the district, and we get big things done all of the time. We're talking about RFK, we could be talking about Poplar Point, or delivering the Frederick Douglass Bridge, or the transformation of the wharf. There are a lot of things that we do together. We also agree with the President's focus on in-person work. Unfortunately, that's being overshadowed by the mass of people being fired from jobs that they're doing to serve the American people. So this is what we do every day. Members of the council, we're talking to members today. We're talking all of the time to members, and we will continue our dialogue with the White House. Okay.
This idea that DC gets treated as a federal agency again. Do you worry at all that this scrutiny on federal spending, the workforce, the cuts that are made could then turn to the district government itself?
Well, what I'm worried about is that we have an approved balanced budget, and that any disruption of that budget and our processes affect direct services. There are lots of reasons why we're not a federal agency, but most of it is people's lives and on the street and their day-to-day is affected by what we do. All right, thank you, everybody. Thank you.
Mayor Bowser. Hey, Mayor Bowser. Mayor Bowser. Is it true that if my situation gets addressed, like a lot of these problems could be resolved for like healthcare issues, human rights issues?
Sir, I'll have one of my staff talk to you over here?
Yes, miss.
Okay.
I just, it sucks to be trying to reach out to you guys and then have the crisis team called on me. And it's like, you're telling me I'm being stolen from, abused, neglected. Mass amounts of employees, jobs that I can get.
None of the good things. None of it can continue. Can you do anything in partnership with the court? Anything like that? They didn't call me. Well, I called again. All right, I really appreciate that. Thank you very much.
so much. Thank you.